Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today, our first question comes from William Leddit, who says, Ramsey, I've recently started taking MMA classes coming from wrestling. I've been sparring and I just got kicked for real, for the first time. I've been feeling a lot of stress before sparring lately. Thoughts? Am I a wimp? Or is it something that takes getting used to? All right, William. Yeah, it takes getting used to. Getting kicked, getting punched, getting hit, that's not really a natural thing for the human body to endure on a regular basis. And so, yeah, that takes some getting used to. If you walk into a fight gym and you're getting punched and kicked and you are used to it already, then you're the type of person who is used to taking abuse, man. Now, I'm going to give you a story. When I started training, and I've told this story before on this channel, but I'll tell it again because it's important. When I started training, when I started fighting, back when I was doing kickboxing, I felt, and my sparring partners felt, that it was important that our training should be as close to the fight as possible. And so all of our sparring was heavy, full contact, knockout, drag-out brawls, because we thought that was important. We thought that's what we were supposed to do. And so we got injured a lot. And in addition to that, what happened? Well, I'll tell you, we developed some bad habits. One of those bad habits I got was I started to cringe when it came time to spar. When I heard the words, it's time to spar, I would get so tense. So tense, so wound up, remembering, those heavy lumps that I would take from sparring. I got clipped right in the temple last time and I saw stars. I got knocked in the chin and it hurt. I got bruised ribs. Man, I got a black eye, I got a bloody nose. I don't want that again. That hurt. I don't like that. That's the body's natural instinct. That's our natural response to abuse. We don't want to experience it again and again and again. So I would suggest, if that's how you're sparring, stop it. If that's how your training partners are sparring, stop it or get some new training partners. Take a cue from the fighters in Thailand. Those Thai fighters who are so exceptional. How do they train? Do they have knockout brawls in the gym? Do they fight in the gym? No, they don't. Why? Because they're saving themselves for the actual fight. What they do in the gym, when they spar, when they play in the ring, it is light and it is technical. And light it's relative. It's relative to, how well you're able to roll with the punches, how well you're able to check the kicks, relative to your own defense. So, for brand new students, for example, when I spar with them, pretty much I paw at them. I go nice and slow. I pull everything. With a more advanced student, whose defense that I trust, a guy who I know is going to block that punch or parry it or slip or move or check that kick, yeah, I'll take some more liberties with the power and the speed and that sort of thing. But yeah, when you're starting out, you're going to make a lot of mistakes in sparring, one of which is you're probably going to go way too hard, you're probably going to get injured, and you're going to instill the bad habit of not looking forward to sparring, of cringing when it comes time to spar. So man, nip that in the bud, and nip it in the bud quick. Great question, my friend. Let's see what else we have. Our friend, is that a Greek name? 2 letters, Delta Tau, says, one question, I am worried about losing flexibility while gaining strength. This is a really common concern with a lot of people. Meaning that certain grips or leverages from Aikido or jiu-jitsu, which use my body's agility, or lack thereof, against me, would work better if I were stronger. Good observation. Martial arts generally work better when you are stronger. The more athletic you are, the more stuff you can do. In addition to, let me skip forward a little. Are there some other exercises to stay flexible, or is that a trade-off that cannot be avoided? Are there some related stretching exercises you would recommend? Yeah. This is one of those show not tell type of questions, and I am planning on making a video about stretching in particular. But I'll give you the verbal version. So, you can be strong and flexible. You can be strong and agile. There's this very old, antiquated notion that you can't do both, that you cannot be strong and flexible, and yet there are many athletes and physical disciplines out there which require both. Take a look at a high-level ballet dancer, for example. I just recently saw that new Disney Nutcracker movie that they made. And it's not a ballet, it's a dramatization, but it features Misty Copeland. There's a short dancing scene. Misty Copeland, a famous ballet dancer from New York City Ballet, I believe. And if you look at her body, you see this woman is strong. She is well built. She's got muscles. She got striations, and she knows how to use them. She knows how to move. If you've never done ballet, it is an extremely athletic endeavor. Those dancers are athletes, and they are strong, but guess what else? They are super flexible. Why? Because they have to be. Why? Because they train that way. Because they train strength and flexibility simultaneously. And guess what? You can do that, and you should do that exact same thing for martial arts. Now, there was a commonly held belief, and there still is in many parts of the world, in many circles of physical culture, that lifting weights, that strength training of any type was bad for a fighter. Even my favorite fighter of all time, Jack Dempsey, in his book, the one part of that book, Championship Fighting, that I would disagree with, is toward the end where he says essentially don't lift weights because it will make you muscle-bound and slow. And that is a misunderstanding. And I understand that's a product of the times. That's what people believed, and a lot of people still believe that. Why? Because, well, two reasons. One, if you lift weights, generally the next day you're going to feel sore. You're going to feel like, oh, these muscles have been worked, and sore muscles are slower muscles. And so it's going to be a big temptation to think, well, I'm not going to lift weights anymore because it makes me slow. Not understanding proper recovery methods. And then there's the second thing. People are comparing athletes, combat sports athletes, to, say, bodybuilders. And bodybuilders train for one thing, aesthetics, how the muscles look, not necessarily how the muscles perform. But if you look at old school bodybuilders, like the old ones, they were very much strength athletes who trained for physique, how it looked, but also how it performed. A lot of these guys were also competitive lifters, meaning who could lift the most. But even so, comparing the agility and the athletic performance of a combat sports athlete to a bodybuilder, a strongman, or a power lifter, it's a bad comparison. Because if you have a guy who only does powerlifting, he's going to have a completely different set of athletic attributes than, say, a professional MMA fighter. But can a professional MMA fighter lift? Yes, and he should, and she should. Lifting is not gender exclusive. Men and women should lift and get strong. And you can do that and be flexible and have full range of motion if you do it right. Look at the squat, for example. That squat. Ever hear all those day after leg day memes? One does not simply retrieve small objects from the floor on the day after leg day. Why? Because your legs will be sore, right? Well, not if you're doing it right. Well, you'll be sore, but not crippling sore if you do it right, man. If you focus on recovery right. If the way you eat, breathe, sleep, move, and think pushes you in a positive direction, yeah, you can recover faster. And there are a bunch of other things you can do as well. But let's not get into that right now. The squat. The squat is a full range of motion exercise, meaning that while you are developing strength, you are also maintaining the flexibility of that range of motion, going all the way down and going all the way up. Let's take the pull-up, for example. I made a video about that the other day. What does the pull-up have to do with flexibility? Well, if you use your entire range of motion like you should, guess what? You will not only maintain, but even improve your range of motion and your flexibility in the shoulders. Cool, right? Look at ballet dancers for a minute. What do they do to develop strength? Well, they do lots and lots of squats. They call them pliés. And they go through their full range of motion in various positions. They do a lot of static stretching, but they do a lot of dynamic stretching as well, like the grand battement. What is that? It is a kick. You're kicking the leg up as high as you can go. Why? To actively stretch out the muscles at the same time as you're moving through the range of motion. Do martial artists do that? Well, yeah, they should. They should absolutely do dynamic stretching. Practice your kicks. Now, if you do Aikido, now, I don't know a great deal about Aikido. I've seen it. And if you are an Aikidoka, I'm not going to tell you how your martial art works. I've seen it. It has a lot of the same principles as martial arts like jiu-jitsu and judo, which I'm much more familiar with. But again, I'm not an Aikido practitioner. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Strength gains will help. And they'll absolutely help with the grips. I mean, grip strength is huge. In the world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of people will say, oh, size and strength don't matter. And while technique is a great equalizer, if you have a big, strong guy with bad technique and a little puny guy with good technique, the little puny guy stands a good chance of beating that big, strong guy, if his technique is good enough. But here's the thing. Get two guys of comparable size and comparable technique, put them in the jiu-jitsu gi, it largely comes down to a contest of grip strength. Who is stronger? And I know that's not a popular idea, but it's the truth. When all other things are equal, the stronger guy is going to win if their technique is comparable. Especially in jiu-jitsu with the gi, that combat sport, that martial art that so often preaches that size and strength don't matter. Grip strength is huge. So I'm going to make a video about that, about stretching, but focus on 3 types of stretching, maybe 4. Yeah, 4 types of stretching. Static stretching, that's the type where you hold the uncomfortable pose for a while, and you stretch out the muscle that way. Dynamic stretching, where you move through the range of motion, kick your leg up in the air, circle your arm around, and so on. Then you've got reciprocal stretching. And again, that's one of those show not tell sort of things, but that requires a partner, somebody to push your body in a certain way while you resist it, and then you relax as your partner is still pushing, and then you go a little bit farther, and then you repeat the process. So reciprocal stretching is a great way to increase your flexibility and range of motion. And then, last of all, myofascial self-release stretching. Essentially, massage or pressure, like the type you would use with a foam roller, or sitting on a tennis ball, rolling it around on your butt to work out the stress in the myofascia in your glutes and around there to release stress on the lower back. A lot of ways to do that. So look forward to that video. Great question. So keep strength training and keep stretching. Do both. Do both simultaneously whenever possible. All right, let's find another question here. Who do we have? Question for the group. Okay, this was a group question. I'm trying to figure out what video this was on. Anyway, our anonymous friend, I guess this was a group email. Interesting. He says, I feel like I know the answer is going to be less controversial and more of an automatic no, but I'll ask anyway. My friend trains traditional BJJ with a gi and recently got his blue belt. I have been training strictly no gi in the 10th Planet system, and we want to roll someday whenever we get a chance. When I get my blue belt, will my friend and I be equal? simply put, are no-gi BJJ belts and traditional BJJ belts the same? Okay. So if you're not familiar with the 10th Planet system, for those listeners and viewers, it's Eddie Bravo's jiu-jitsu, where they grapple without the gi. Yes, they don't use the sacred Brazilian jiu-jitsu uniform. Why not? Well, talk to Eddie Bravo about that. He's got his reasons. And in traditional Brazilian jiu-jitsu, they wear the gi, they wear the uniform, and that changes the game a lot. So, will a no-gi 10th Planet jiu-jitsu practitioner with a blue belt be at the same level as a gi practitioner with a blue belt? Here's the thing. Those are two different skill sets. Let me give you an illustration with a story. I don't remember how long ago, but my first jiu-jitsu tournament with the gi was an interesting, eye-opening experience because I had already competed in many grappling tournaments without a gi. Grappling, catch wrestling, no-gi jiu-jitsu, and I had competed professionally as a professional mixed martial artist. I'd won some professional fights with jiu-jitsu techniques, but I had never actually put on the jiu-jitsu gi at this point. And I had never really trained in gi techniques. I didn't understand grip fighting or any of that stuff, how to strip the grips, how to capitalize on the grips, how to use all those grips with the gi. And so I signed up as a white belt because I didn't have a belt rank, and I thought, well, this is sandbagging. It's not fair. I'm a pro fighter. I have all this experience. I've been grappling for years, and a lot of these guys are just starting out. That's not fair at all. But that's the division they put me in because, I didn't have a belt at the time in any other rank in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I went out there and I thought I was sandbagging. And my very first match, this guy comes out who had probably 3 months of experience under his belt, not a lot of technical knowledge, and he comes out and grabs my lapels, grabs the lapels of the gi, and he holds on with a death grip. And he stiff-armed me. And that was it. He wasn't trying to take me down. He wasn't trying to submit me. He was just holding on for dear life with stiff arms on the lapels. And I didn't think much of it. I tried to shoot for a takedown, and I realized I can't get past these stiff arms. He's got a frame on me. And I tried to pull his hands off, but his grip was too strong. And if I ever did get one hand off, another one went right back on the lapels. And this went on for about 5 minutes. And I did everything I could to try to close the gap and strip these grips, and I didn't understand grip fighting at all. At all. And I felt foolish. I remember thinking, I'm a pro fighter. I know jiu-jitsu, but why can't I use my jiu-jitsu? All he's doing is holding onto my lapels. I felt stupid. And like I said, he wasn't even doing anything, just holding on. And eventually the referee stopped the match and said, "Hey guys, make something happen or I'll disqualify you both." And so frantically I thrashed around trying to break through these grips. We ended up tumbling on the ground and nobody scored. And so the referee awarded the other guy an advantage point. And I was so confused, what? How did he win? All he did was hold on. I was the one doing all the work. And I was the one spending all the energy. That's true. But since he had control of the lapels, which in the referee's opinion was the more dominant position, and looking back, in the gi it kind of is, he was awarded the advantage point. And so he won the match, and I walked off the mat dejected and disillusioned and so confused, how did that happen? How was this guy able to beat me on points or in any way, shape, or form? With only 3 months of experience, all he did was hold my lapels, and I was so mad. I was so mad that I went out and I bought a bunch of gis. I bought a bunch of gi jackets. I went back to my gym, and I went out there and I tossed a gi out to everybody. You get a gi, you get a gi, you get a gi. I was like the Oprah of gis. And I was like, put those on, guys. We're going to figure this out. I never want to be embarrassed like that again. And so we all put on the gis, and we practiced stripping the grips and stuff, and practiced moving around in the gis until after a few years of training in the gi, wasn't so much of an issue anymore. And since then, since I train in the gi on a regular basis now, competing in the gi, no problem at all. Even got some shiny gold medals at home showing, hey, I understand how to grip fight in a gi. Okay. Now, this is not a discussion about which is better, no gi or gi. I enjoy no gi grappling much, much more. And I believe it is much, much more applicable to the sport of mixed martial arts. Like way more. Because as far as gi grappling, you got to scrap a lot of that. A lot of the gi strategies simply don't work in MMA. You got to scrap like 80% of that, throw it in the garbage, and never look back and modify a lot of the rest of it. Because mixed martial arts is such a vastly different sport from IBJJF, jiu-jitsu, or really any other style of jiu-jitsu in the gi. You got to modify that stuff. So I do have some friends who train in 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, and, I'm a fan of 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. I own all of Eddie Bravo's books, and I studied those, man. I even used some of his techniques in some of my fights, and, good stuff. I enjoyed the rubber guard and the twister and all that stuff, but if you've never grappled in a gi, and you go to grapple wearing the gi for the first time against somebody who understands that, you're going to be a fish out of water. You're going to be a white belt, basically. And you're going to feel like a fly stuck in a spider's web, and you're going to take that gi off and throw it on the ground and say, I hate this stupid thing. Because it's a different sport. And your mind is tricking you into thinking, oh, it's the same sport. It's not that different. But it's a different sport. At the same time, this doesn't happen as much, but I have seen some people who train in the gi so much and have only ever trained in the gi and become so reliant on the grips and the gi fighting strategies that when they take it off and start trying to learn the sport of mixed martial arts, it's endlessly frustrating. And they're like, what? And they're reaching for things that aren't there. Now, I know not everybody has this problem. Some people can take off the gi and transition to no gi, no big problem. And some people can put the gi on and they don't have a big issue with it, and it seems to come naturally to them. For example, one of the wrestling coaches here, Michael Holbert, he was on my podcast a while back. The first time he put on the gi, he took to it like a fish to water. He was like, oh, wow, it's got all these extra handles. Why? Because he knows how to wrestle really, really well. And so for a good wrestler, having these extra things to hold on to and grip, those are extra weapons, extra tools. So will you and your friend, when you're both blue belts in your respective systems, be at the same level? Not really. You'll have different skill sets. That's what it comes down to. Interesting question. Great discussion. Let's see what we have next. Our next question comes from our friend Dennis Sparks. Man, we got some weird light going on there. But if you're listening at home only, that's fine. No problem there. So Dennis Sparks, he has an interesting story. He's had some issues that have set him back physically in a big way. And yeah, man, I feel you. I've experienced similar things, just basically having to go back to zero. And then claw my way back up. So our friend Dennis, he's had a rough time, but he's worked for 6 months to reclaim control of his body, to return it back to the state before all of that hard stuff happened to him. And he says on November 30th, that's coming up, he's going to have his first amateur MMA fight. All right. Good job, man, and good luck. And he was wondering what kind of training should be done those last few days before the fight to make sure that I am loose, energetic, and refreshed as possible the day of the fight. Thank you for your time and for making great videos. Hey, thank you. Thank you for watching and for getting out there and training. He goes on to say, I cannot express how helpful they have been in that journey of recovery, man. Thank you. That means a lot. That means a lot to me. Our Dennis, the last few days before the fight, that is really more about putting your mind in the right spot than putting your body in the right place. All the training you have done, all those months preceding the fight, that's putting your body in the right spot. The last few days before the fight, you don't want to do anything that's going to injure you, so you're not going to spar. You might do some shadow sparring, just moving around with another person there, just moving. Nothing that's going to even risk injury. Okay. You might do some shadow boxing. You might hit the bags a little. Nothing that's going to make you sore. Nothing that's going to require recovery or extended recovery from. Just to keep the blood moving. Right? And to keep you in the right state of mind. And this is huge. The mindset. At the same time, you don't want to step back and just sleep the whole time, and unless that's your jam, unless you've done this before, which you haven't. Again, you said it's your first amateur fight. And it's going to take you a while. It's going to take you a number of competition experiences before you really figure out your system. I've trained fighters like a student named Travis, and he had a very, very particular way about how he wanted to get ready for the fight on those last few days, how he wanted to warm up for the fight. He wanted to go into the fight almost cold. And that worked really well for him psychologically. A lot of fighters like to bounce up and down and skip rope and hit pads and get all sweaty, work up a good sweat before they go in the fight. And that helps them psychologically. But for Travis, he wanted to go in cold to save every ounce of energy. That was important psychologically for him, to save everything for the fight so he could land that knockout shot. And he knocked some fools out, man. This guy was a hitter. Man, this dude could punch. But that's not a strategy I would recommend for everybody. Again, some people need that extended warm-up. I'm one of those guys who needs that extended warm-up. But what I generally do with my fighters that I train, especially the new guys who don't have an established routine, who don't have a preference for how to spend those last couple days before fight time, or spend the last couple hours before fight time, I'll put them through routines that they're familiar with. The same warm-ups that we do before classes, for example. Why? Because it helps them go back to this psychological, physiological state where they're comfortable. For example, you go out to a venue, there's some music blaring, there's some ring girls walking around, there's people shouting, boo, hiss, ah, woo, whatever they're saying. There's a lot going on there psychologically. And it's a big temptation to let your mind just go all over the place and get nervous and experience anxiety in ways that are not productive to winning fights. And so when I take my fighters out to these arenas, I put them through the same simple warm-ups that we do in the gym. The same simple joint rotation. Why? Because it relaxes them. It puts them back in the state like, oh yeah, this is just like at the gym. This place where I'm comfortable. This place where I feel loose. This place where I can showcase my skills to the fullest potential. Because most people, when they go out to fight, they don't showcase their skills to the fullest potential. They're nervous. They're anxious. They've cut weight. They're feeling not 100% for a lot of reasons. But if you can put yourself in the same kind of state of mind as when you're comfortable training, then you'll be much more comfortable when you actually get in there in the ring. At the same time, maybe you're one of those guys who gets motivated by somebody lighting a fire under your butt a little bit. Some people do. In my experience, most people don't. Most people need to release stress. They need to get away from that anxiety and replace it with something else, with something positive. So in those last few days, relax. Not saying don't work, but work in a way that allows you to relax. And work in a way that allows you to stay safe and productive and free from anxiety. Because man, those pre-fight nerves, it's weird because it's all inside of you. There's nothing on the outside putting that in you. It's just you. It's just your mind. So if you can put your mind in a place where you can let all that go and just go out there and fight your fight and perform your best, and do what you can do. Because at the end of the day, that's all we can do. We should never, ever give anything less than that, my friend. So good luck in your fight. Come out arms up in victory at the end. Thanks for the question. Now get out there and train smart for those 3 days. Next question. Our next question comes from our friend Business Raptor, and actually a lot of people have been asking me this question ever since the UFC has announced opening the largest performance institute in the world in Shanghai, China. They ask, how do I feel about this? Is it taken as competition for me, or do I consider it an opportunity for Chinese MMA? Man, I'm going to tell you, I think it's pretty awesome that the UFC is opening up not just a institute here, but the biggest one in the whole world, in my hometown. I think that's cool. And I'll tell you why that's so cool. 10 years ago when I first got to China, nobody knew what MMA was. I mean, there were a couple of guys. There were like 10 guys up at the Xi'an Sports University who were on the Sanda team who were transitioning to the sport of MMA, who had some interest in that. And there were a couple of guys up in Beijing, like Ao Hailin and a couple of his students, and Bao Li Gao and a couple of guys he trained with, but really just a small handful of guys in this country with 1.3 billion people, like people you could count on your fingers and toes, who knew what MMA was. And man, I remember before I came to China, when I would see guys wearing tap-out shirts, I would think, oh man, it's a poser in a tap-out shirt. And when I got here to China, it was so hard finding anybody who even knew what MMA was. I remember one day I saw this local guy wearing a tap-out shirt, and I ran up to him like, you know what MMA is? He was like, yeah, MMA, yeah, UFC, cool. And we had this very interesting conversation because he didn't speak English and I didn't speak Chinese, but we understood each other because we spoke the same language, mixed martial arts, and that was super cool to me. But that was the rare exception. Trying to sell gym memberships for my first gym I opened up 10 years ago here in Shanghai, man, that was like pulling teeth. Trying to explain to people this new sport they'd never heard of. This crazy no-holds-barred cage fighting thing. They'd look at me like I was crazy. What? Why would you do that? Like, don't you think this is a waste of your time and everybody else's time? That's nuts. Why? Cage fighting, that'll never catch on. So the fact that we went from that to the UFC opening up their Performance Institute here in my hometown in Shanghai, China, that's huge, man. I think it is awesome. So I haven't seen this institute yet. They're not open to the public yet. When they do open, I'm totally going to go there and probably make a video about it. That's what I do, man. And I'll give you more reactions about that. So I'm really excited about seeing that, and I'm really excited to see what happens. Now, one thing that worries me, because I've seen a lot of this happen to a lot of gyms, because gym culture is really fairly new in the People's Republic of China. Like just having gyms with like weights and treadmills and stuff, that's a fairly new thing within like the last 15 years. I mean, 10 years ago when I first got here, if you went to one of the few big commercial gyms with the weights and the treadmills that they would have, it was very hard to find standard barbells. And it was hard to find a decent setup just to do basic powerlifting like squats, deadlifts, bench press. They'd have, machines and stuff, and maybe some light dumbbells and a bunch of treadmills. And you would see people in there like wearing their street clothes. Like gym clothes, it was a weird foreign concept. People would be like, well, what am I going to put on gym shorts for? Sneakers? I got my dress shoes on. That's good enough, isn't it? And you'd see like ladies walking on the treadmill in their high heels and things like that. Because again, it was such a foreign concept. Now it's pretty normal. You'll see gyms all over with the weights and the treadmills and things like that. But it's still fairly new. And there are tons of gyms in Shanghai now, a lot of them very expensive, big, hugely outfitted with everything. And there's nobody in them. A lot of these gyms, there's nobody in them. Or very few people inside of them. And a lot of these gyms open with big ambitions like, we're going to be the next big thing. We're going to make lots of money. We're going to sell tons of memberships. And then 3 months later, they close up because nobody came. And they didn't have the deep pockets like the UFC does to keep it running. So I imagine the UFC is going to sink a lot of money into this and lose a lot of money on this at first. It's a long-term investment, and I'm so happy that somebody who understands the sport of mixed martial arts is finally making a long-term investment in China. Because what's happened so far in China, there are so many MMA shows out here, fly-by-night MMA shows. Get-rich-quick schemes, essentially, where you have a guy who thinks, you know what, I can make a bunch of money by putting on a MMA show, by exploiting the fighters. And so they get a bunch of fighters, pay them some piddly amount, and they spend a bunch of money on the production to make it look all neat, sell a bunch of tickets, and then they never put on another event. And then another show comes and does the same, and another, and another, and another. So there's so many fight shows, MMA, K1, boxing, kickboxing, Sanda, all throughout the People's Republic of China, that you hear of once and then never again. Or maybe they run for a year and then they're done. 2 years and then they're done. Man, so many. So many. The UFC, on the other hand, there's an organization with staying power. So if they do not turn a profit within a year on this institute, guess what? They can keep it open. If they don't turn a profit in 5 years on this institute, they can keep it open. Will they? I hope so. I hope so, because that is what it's going to take to change the cultural attitudes toward mixed martial arts here. That's what it's going to take to make it a mainstream sport here. Now, it's kind of interesting to see what Western sports have become mainstream in China. 2 in particular, basketball and skateboarding. Weird, right? Let me turn that up just a little bit. Yeah, basketball and skateboarding. Basketball became popular here, and a lot of people say, well, it's because of, what's his name, that big tall dude. Sorry, I'm not a basketball fan. That giant Chinese guy, what was his name? Some of you are screaming in the comments, his name was... Man, I can picture his face. You know who I'm talking about. Anyway, giant Chinese basketball player. One of the first, if not the first, NBA players from mainland China. And a lot of people assumed that when the Chinese saw, hey, one of us is playing in that league, therefore basketball is cool. I'm sure some people had that thought process, but it's more than that. I think it's the fact that the NBA knows how to market their product. And they know how to make it look cool. They know how to make it seem interesting. And so, when they were finally able to market it in China, and they made it fun, and they made it cool, and they made it interesting, people paid attention. And one thing the UFC does better than any other MMA show is they make it look fun and cool and interesting. And so when they're able to bring that to China, to the public view, it's a very real possibility that in spite of having no mainstream, big, standout names from the People's Republic of China, because they only have, right now they have 10 fighters in the UFC, and the average person hasn't heard of any of them. I mean, I could name a few, like my old buddy Wong Guan, who punched a hole in my skull. Yeah, he's fighting the UFC. He's a great fighter. But the average person doesn't know who he is. If you walk up to an average Chinese person and say, hey, do you know who Wong Guan is? They'll be like, what? Who? No idea. And if he does become UFC champion, the average Chinese person still probably won't know who he is. But since the UFC knows how to market the sport, they know how to sell the sport of mixed martial arts, when they start doing that in mainland China, in a similar fashion that they do it outside of mainland China, I think they'll be doing pretty well for themselves. The problem happens, I think, with a lot of foreign companies who try to sell their product in China. Instead of selling the foreign product, they try to Chineseify it. This happened with McDonald's a while back. McDonald's is a pretty popular restaurant here in Shanghai. It's the second most popular American fast food restaurant. The first one being KFC. Weird, right? Because worldwide, McDonald's is way more popular than KFC. But in China, it's the second most popular fast food restaurant. And the reason it is popular is because Chinese people, when they go to McDonald's, they want to have an authentic American fast food experience. They want to eat Big Macs and fries and stuff like that. And so what does McDonald's do? They sell Big Macs and fries. Not Chineseified Big Macs and fries, but the actual same product that you can buy in the US or anywhere else in the world where there is a McDonald's. And their name in Chinese, man, I don't remember how to pronounce it, but it sounds similar to McDonald's when you say it in Mandarin. But there was a big controversy recently. McDonald's wanted to change their Chinese name to something that translated to like the Golden Arches because they thought it sounded more beautiful. But there was a big public backlash because they didn't want a Chineseified version of this American experience. They wanted the authentic American experience, and they wanted the authentic American name. So they're familiar with the name McDonald's, and the Mandarin name sounds like McDonald's. And they wanted that. That was part of the experience. And so I was looking at the posters for UFC. Yeah, what does this have to do with the UFC, right? I was looking at the posters for the UFC event that they're running in Beijing this weekend. Today, in fact. Yeah, the UFC is up in Beijing today. It's the second event in mainland China. First one was here in Shanghai. And on the posters, all of the fighters pictured were Chinese. So all of the fighters on the card are not Chinese. They've got plenty of international fighters up there, plenty of American fighters and others. But the only fighters pictured on the advertisements were the Chinese ones. And I honestly think that's a marketing mistake. And I'll tell you why. Because that is what you see on every fight poster ever in China, except for the ones that specifically promote, hey, look, we have some foreigners. Come look at the foreigners fight. MMA fans in China, yeah, they want to see their hometown heroes compete, and that's great that they're on the poster, and I love that. But at the same time, they want to see the big foreign names. They want to see those A-list fighters that they've seen on TV. They want to see this imported product. They want to see those guys that they've only ever seen on TV and never had a chance to see in person because they can't afford to get a visa to go to the United States to watch an event in Las Vegas, to see, man, who are the top guys right now in the UFC. Man, to see like Daniel Cormier or Anderson Silva or Nick Diaz or Conor McGregor. They can't see those guys. But imagine if you brought them over here to China and put them on the poster. The fans would love that. And put them right next to their hometown heroes. I mean, man, that's a winning strategy in my book. But then again, I'm not in charge of the world's largest mixed martial arts organization. So we'll see how it plays out. The UFC can afford to make subtle mistakes because they're going to learn from them and they're going to fix them in the long run. Again, like I said, they're playing the long game because they can afford to. I've always said what China really needs right now, as far as mixed martial arts, is not more professional competition. They need more entry-level competition. That's why what Kunlun Fight is doing right now is so cool. If you haven't heard of Kunlun Fight, it's a Chinese fight organization. They specialize mostly in K1 kickboxing events. K1 rules kickboxing, but they're starting an MMA league, an entry-level professional mixed martial arts league. And what's so cool about that is that up until now, all of the MMA events here in China have been professional. They try to get the best fighters they possibly can. They get the national Sanda champions to fight whoever they can get to fight them. And so a lot of people are put off by this. Like I want to do MMA, but I'm only an amateur level, so I can't fight against the national Sanda champion. That's suicide. But have a show like Kunlun, where they go the opposite route. Hey, look, this is a show for the little guys who want to build their way up and get experience and get more experience so that eventually they can fight in the high-level pro shows. And that's a brilliant idea. So we need more low-level, entry-level pro, more amateur events so that people can rack up that experience. And from what I've read about the UFC Institute, they plan on filming events there in their gym, because it's equipped a lot like the Ultimate Fighter compound where they film The Ultimate Fighter. So I don't know where these fights will be broadcast, maybe on the web, maybe on a pay-per-view event. But what I'm hoping, since they are hoping to attract local Chinese talent to this institute, I'm hoping they will have a venue for the entry-level fighters to compete and get their feet wet, so that eventually they'll be able to climb up the ranks and fight in the big show. So, there's your answer, my friend. I'm pretty excited about it. Do I see it as competition? No, because we're doing a different thing. Well, we're doing a different thing in the same type of business, in the fight business. My thing is I coach fighters to win fights. I work with individuals on an individual basis. What are they doing? They're working on a more widespread national level. They're trying to get their foot in the door. They're trying to promote the sport of mixed martial arts. Whereas I am trying to work with individuals, promote talent and abilities, cultivate talent and abilities in individuals. Thanks for the question, man. Let's see what else we have. Our friend San Pellegrino says, "Hey Ramsey, how are you?" "Good. Thank you. I'm doing well. I don't know where is the best place to write to you. In the comments down below, or send me an email at ramseydewey@gmail.com. As I always say in these Q&A with the Coach videos, if you have a question, leave it down in the comments below, or send me an email at ramseydewey, all one word, no spaces, @gmail.com. Anyway, San Pellegrino has this question. If I were to get into a street fight, don't get into street fights, my friend. And here's the thing, a lot of people confuse street fight with self-defense, and they're not the same thing. And I believe the semantics is very important when we're talking about street fights, self-defense, and assaults. Don't get them confused. What is a street fight? A street fight is when two or more guys get mad at each other. They say angry things. They push and they shove. It turns into swings. The swings turn into headlocks. They tumble on the ground. Their friends pull them apart and say, "Stand up and fight like a real man." And then they come up with some face-saving exit to stop the fight. Or one of them gets laid out flat and does the fish dance on the ground. Or the other guy's friends jump in and beat him up. So don't get into street fights. Street fights are avoidable. Assaults, self-defense situations, that's a different situation. If you're walking down the street minding your own business, and some random stranger jumps out and attacks you, that is an assault. It is not a street fight. Now, you may fight as a form of self-defense in that situation, but it's not a street fight. It's an aggravated assault. Big difference. Street fights are dumb. Don't get into them. Don't start them. Don't participate in them. If you were assaulted, if you are legitimately defending yourself from an act of aggravated assault, that's a different situation. So I'm going to answer this question as if you had asked me, what if I get assaulted out in the street and I need to defend myself? So he says, going on, what kind of attack should I lead with? People say that if you start by punching, you're going to get your hand broken. Is this true? What are the best alternatives? Okay. Yeah, a lot of self-defense and martial arts experts will say don't throw closed-fisted punches in a fight because you might break your hands. All right, now you have to ask yourself, what would actually break your hand? Well, punching somebody right on the point of the elbow or punching somebody in the forehead if they headbutt you or put some weight behind it. That has the potential to break your hands. Now, that being said, can you use your fists to intelligently defend yourself, your bare fists, in a self-defense situation? Yeah, you can. You've got to practice with them a lot, you've got to condition with them a lot, and you've got to hit the right spots. Remember this mantra: hard weapons against soft targets, soft weapons against hard targets, with some exceptions. So if you're punching with your fist, you got 27, 28, something like that, small fragile bones in your hand, connected with lots of strings of soft tissue. Hands are fairly delicate, especially unconditioned hands. If you haven't practiced punching stuff with your bare hand before, you're in for a rude awakening if you throw a full contact punch at a human skull for the first time. It's going to leave a mark on you. It might break you. That being said, I'm a big proponent of using your hands as weapons, your fists as weapons. But you got to train for it. You've got to train for it, and you've got to condition. And you've got to hit the right spots. Aim for the side of the chin, aim for the soft parts of the face, aim for the body. Those are all viable targets. Aim for the quadricep. Yeah, you can punch people in the leg. Did you know that? Man, look at, what's his name, Benson Henderson in the UFC. That is a great example of using the lead jab to strike the leg right on the lead quadricep to set up some really, really cool stuff. It's a technique that we've adapted at our gym quite a bit to set up takedowns, to set up head kicks, to set up strikes to the head, and all kinds of really interesting things. And it also tends to confuse people who've never been punched in the leg before. If you put some stopping power behind that, boom, nice falling step stiff jab, and if you understand your footwork, where to place your lead leg, you can do it with relative impunity. But I digress. As far as a self-defense situation, if you are unarmed, if you are unarmed in a self-defense situation, man, tisk tisk, my friend, that's unfortunate. Because a simple weapon, even a stick or a rock or whatever, is going to be a great equalizer and give you a massive advantage in that fight, in that conflict. So my advice, what's the best way to fight in a self-defense situation? Get a weapon. But if you absolutely don't have one, well, kicks are a good option if you know how to kick. And I've heard a lot of people, generally the same type of people, who say don't punch in a real-life self-defense altercation sort of thing because you might break your hand. They'll often also say, don't throw kicks because you might become unbalanced. And here's the thing. With kicks, you got to practice them. You've got to condition your striking points. You got to put in the work. If you haven't put in the work, nothing's going to work for you. Because techniques don't work in fights. Martial arts don't work in fights. You work in a fight. Work works in a fight. That's it. So if you have a shirt, for example, and you have a bare hand and you are honestly worried about breaking it, and you wrap that shirt around your hand, look, you got an improv boxing glove. What's the point of a boxing glove? To protect your hand, not to protect the other guy's face. Go out to the street for a minute. Let's talk about street fighting. Fighting the actual street. Put on a boxing glove, a nice heavy 12, 14, 16-ounce boxing glove, and punch the street as hard as you can. Yeah, fight that street. Punch it. How hard can you hit it? Probably pretty hard, right? You can probably put all your weight in there. Why? Because the padding on that glove will absorb the shock. Now take off that glove and punch the street as hard as you can. Oh, you didn't? Why not? Because that would hurt. That would break your hand, man. You can't punch concrete with full force. That will break you. Now, take a shirt, wrap it around your fist. What happens? You got an improv boxing glove. You got a buffer protecting those small, fragile bones. So now you can punch with more reckless abandon than you otherwise could. So what else can you do? How about elbows? If you're going to strike, elbows are an excellent alternative to fists. Why? Because it's one hard, sharp, heavy bone, and you can hit the forehead. You can hit the bones. You can have bone-on-bone contact with that. And because it is so hard and so sharp, the olecranon, that pointy bone at the end of the elbow, is one of the hardest structures, one of the 3 hardest structures on the human body. That would be the frontal bone, the heel, and the olecranon, the tip of the elbow. So man, use that. And at the same time, some people are probably typing, but what about range? Because elbows are short range. Yeah, they are. That's why you got to train and understand footwork and position so that you can actually land those strikes. Because if you don't know how to fight, if you haven't specifically trained how to fight, if you haven't trained position, it doesn't matter what kind of punches and kicks you're throwing, you're not going to connect. You're not going to do damage. You're not going to save yourself. So as I always say, get out there and train. Next question. Our friend Mr. Walala says, can you tell us a joke at the beginning of your next video, please? Oh, man, this is kind of in the middle of my video. I guess I could edit it and put this at the beginning of the video. But okay, here's a joke for you. This is a joke that I heard on the Dr. Demento show back in the early 80s when that was still on the radio, when people still listened to radio shows instead of podcasts. You guys ever listen to Dr. Demento? It was like this comedy sketch show on the radio in the early morning. And they'd have some funny stuff and do some songs and audio sketches. But they had this joke segment where people would call in and tell the radio show host a joke. But he said, no racist jokes, none of those prejudiced 3 guys of different nationalities jokes, and the stupid one is the nationality we don't like. If anybody calls in with a joke like that, I'm going to hang up. And so he ended up hanging up on a lot of people, because a lot of people had racist, insensitive jokes he didn't want to hear. And this was way before the PC era. He was just like, man, I don't want you making fun of people because of their color of their skin or their religion or anything like that. That's not cool. But the first joke that actually aired on this radio show was this one, the story of Benny the Frog. So let me tell you the story of Benny the Frog. Once upon a time, there was a young frog named Benny. And Benny wanted more than anything else in the whole wide world to have a long, wise beard. But being a frog, without any hair follicles on his face, Benny could not grow a beard. And so he wished and he hoped in vain. That is, until one day, Benny's fairy frog father appeared to him and said, Benny, since you have been such a good young frog all the days of your life, I will grant you one wish, whatsoever your heart desires. And Benny said, oh, good, kind, gracious fairy frog father, thank you very much. I wish, more than anything else in the whole wide world, to have a long, wise beard. And the fairy frog father said, very well, Benny, I will give you your beard. But you must promise never, ever to shave off your beard. Otherwise, you will be transformed into an urn. An urn? Said Benny. Yes, an urn, said the fairy frog father. One of those pots that they keep the ashes of the cremated dead in. Ew, thought Benny, I don't want to be an urn. But, said Benny, I will never shave off my beard. So I promise I will never shave off the beard. Now please, give me my long, wise beard. And the fairy frog father said, very well. And he waved his magic wand, bopped Benny on the head with it, and poof! A long, wise beard grew right out of the little frog's face. And Benny was so happy with his long, wise beard, he hopped up and down the pond, up and down the swamp, showing off his long, wise beard to all of his friends. He whiffed it and wafted it and waved it about in the air, and he loved it. For a while. But after a time, the novelty of the beard wore off. The beard became old and ragged and unkempt. And over time, Benny forgot his promise to the fairy frog father. And do you know what he did? Oh, he shaved off his long, wise beard. And then, poof! Instantly, Benny was transformed into an urn. Now, the moral of the story, my friends, is this. A Benny shaved is a Benny urn. Now, for some of you out there who don't speak English as a native language and are not familiar with the writings and the sayings of Benjamin Franklin, this is the segment of the show I like to call Explaining Jokes So They're Not Funny Anymore. But I know a lot of you are not native English speakers, and that joke probably went way over your head because it's a pun. And puns are rarely ever funny. Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States of America, in his publication Poor Richard's Almanac, used to write some wise sayings and proverbs that he would make up, one of which was, a penny saved is a penny earned, meaning save your money, and that's kind of like earning money. A penny shaved is a penny earned, a penny saved is a penny earned. Ha 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 ha. Okay, it's not funny when you explain it. It's like a math joke. You ever have a math class with a teacher who thought he had a sense of humor, and he's like, all right, guys, check out this algebra problem up on the board. And he's like chuckling to himself, and you're all staring like, what is wrong with this guy? And he's like, okay, if you solve for X, then you see that it's so funny. Ha ha. And you're like, what's funny about this? And then he explains the math joke, and he's like, it's funny because if you carry the 2, then, and it's like, what? Math jokes are never funny, man. They're never funny unless you're a math teacher, I guess. I don't know. There's probably one dude out there in the comments typing a math joke, and he's like, I thought this one was funny. And that's okay. Everybody has a different sense of humor. But there is your joke for the day, my friends. I hope you enjoyed it. Next question. Our friend Colin M., in a reply to a video I made titled, What is the Role of Traditional Martial Arts in MMA? He says, I think a more important question is, what is the role of MMA in traditional martial arts? Huh. That is an interesting question. Let's talk about that for a minute. What is the role of MMA in traditional martial arts? Man, since MMA became a thing, traditional martial arts have changed. A lot of dojos out there have had to step up their game. Because a lot of them, frankly, just weren't very focused on actual fighting and more conceptual martial arts. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're honest about it. But at the same time, if what you're advertising is, come sign up at my dojo and you will be able to win fights if you train in my system, but you don't actually train to fight, then yeah, that's dishonest. That's a big disservice. So yeah, since the UFC came out, man, a lot of people, like I said, have stepped up their game in the traditional martial arts world. I would say before UFC came out, a lot of Taekwondo gyms and a lot of MMA, or not, karate schools, because I trained in both karate and Shotokan karate and Taekwondo back in the day. And I trained in a few different traditional martial arts as well, Budoshin, Nihon Jiu-Jitsu, things like that. Okinawan Kobudo. And so I initially was really resistant to the idea of mixed martial arts. This idea that, wait a minute, that's what real fighting looks like? I don't like the way real fighting looks like. I wanted it to look like a kung fu movie instead, like it was in my head. I wanted a live-action blood sport. And the reality is, real fighting looks different. Sometimes it looks sloppy. Sometimes it looks not crisp and clean. Because real fighting is chaos. It's absolute chaos. And so, yeah, mixed martial arts gives everybody else a reference point to see what a real fight looks like on a regular basis. And yeah, I know there's that angry guy in the comments down below who is obsessed with putting his hands on people's genitals, who is going to type furiously in all caps, but in a real fight you can punch and grab the groin. I'm not sure if what you, my friend, are actually training for is a real fight, or if it's something else that is not appropriate to talk about on a family-friendly channel like this. So, how has martial arts caused TMA to step up its game? So like I said, let's talk about Taekwondo for a minute. Now, I know some folks who are what you might call old school Taekwondo practitioners. Some of my old coaches, man, they knew how to fight. They knew how to use their martial art to fight. Not just to score points, but man, to knock people out. And they were good at it. And it was, I mean, Taekwondo competition back then, man, it was legit. Today it's different. It's different. It's more about scoring points and point-specific strategies than it is about doing damage. I mean, you can still win a Taekwondo bout by knockout, and so there's that, but so many of the matches have nothing to do with knocking people out or inflicting damage, more about just touching the guy in the right spot with your foot. And that's a shame, because that style of training is often reflected in the dojongs and in the Taekwondo world to this day. And so you see a watering down of the system, and small children getting black belts when they really shouldn't. And yeah, but as a result, after the UFC came out, I noticed a lot of traditional martial arts schools would rebrand their gym, and instead of saying this is a Taekwondo gym, they would say this is a combat Taekwondo gym. To basically say, yeah, we're not one of those namby-pamby point sparring gyms. We're like the real deal. And I heard some traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu gyms change their name to combat jiu-jitsu to try to sound more legitimate. And a lot of little details like this have had you can see the effect. You can see people afraid that when this thing that is better, and some people are like, no, it's objective, not subjective. Let me clarify that. This thing that is better at presenting the reality of what a real fight is, where you have people, give them a very limited rule set, put them in a cage and say, let them fight, let them scrap, let them do what they want. We're going to see something much, much more real than we would if we have a bunch of reality-based self-defense guys, or a guy who trains in a very specific martial arts system based on tradition, and then have them talk about fighting. Because a lot of what they do is talk about fighting. Or have them fight under a very strict set of rules. Like no punches to the head. No kicks to the legs. No takedowns. No ground fighting. No elbows. No this, no that, no the other. And yes, MMA has rules. It has a list of fouls. You really should call it that, a list of fouls. But again, that list is slim, and a lot of the things on the list actually have nothing to do with fighting. No foul language. No unsportsmanlike conduct. No inserting your fingers into the fence to try to gain an advantage. I mean, outside of a cage, that wouldn't come into play. So, man, that is a fascinating question. Let me turn that question over to you, because I'd like to hear some comments down below. Since MMA has become a thing, especially for you old school traditional martial artists, you old school Taekwondo guys, you old school karate guys, or traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu guys, or Aikido practitioners, or judokas, etc. How has mixed martial arts affected your school, or your dojo, or your gym, or your personal training? There's one way it affected me. It changed my life. It made me realize, man, there is this whole other facet to martial arts that I didn't realize. And I have not been honest about my training. I've been training a piece of the puzzle, and I want to see the whole picture. I want the whole thing, not just a little piece that I was content with before. So that's my story. Great question. Keep them coming. Our next question comes from our friend Trevor Nagler, who also asks about the UFC Institute they're opening up in Shanghai, but he has some additional parts to that question, which is, how long do I think it will be until we see a Chinese UFC champion? Are there fighters that could be good enough currently fighting, or will the first Chinese champion in the UFC be someone that hasn't fought yet? Maybe someone that isn't even born yet? Do you see this as a move to stop ONE FC from moving ahead of them? Opening up the institute? Maybe. If so, do you think they will be successful in this? And fourth part of this question, finally, will this mean anything to you in your gym? Probably. If it increases the interest of MMA in Shanghai, it's definitely going to increase the interest in my gym. So, a lot of people, you could open up the biggest and best martial arts training facility in the world, which apparently the UFC is trying to do here. And people would still be like, it's too far from my house. I'm going to go to this gym over here that's only 1 block away. That one's like 3 or 4 metro stops away. I'm going to go to the one that's only 1 stop from my house. And you're going to run into people like that all the time. So, man, I get so many people who sign up to my gym because it just happened to be in their neighborhood. But at the same time, man, I got this student, this Chinese dude who goes by the name Michael. He's a Taekwondo instructor at the Shanghai Sports University. And he comes to my gym to train. And he lives out in the far reaches of Chongqing district, which reaches way out into the west. Shanghai is a massive, massive sprawling city. It's almost like a dozen cities squished together, like a dozen big cities squished together. So, man, like my gym to the far reaches of Chongqing is like, man, it's like if you live in the U.S., it's like one state, one county to another county that far away. Or sometimes one state crossing the state lines to go train. So yeah, I have people coming from all over the city to train, but also that group who only signed up because it happened to be closest to me, closest to them. So I'm sure that's going to happen a lot with the new UFC gym. So to go back to that first question, he has a few more questions. How long will it take before we see a Chinese champion? I would say, man, probably another generation, I'm guessing. Probably one more generation before we really see some dominant Chinese fighters who didn't need any extra help to get where they are. That's my guess. He asks, are there fighters currently on the UFC roster who could win the championship? Anyone could win or lose a fight on any given day. But like I said before, right now there are 10 Chinese fighters from mainland China signed to the UFC. And I would say the one that probably has the best shot at being UFC champion would be Wang Guan. And I'm not just saying that because I fought him and I want him to be UFC champion so I can say, hey, I fought a UFC champion once. That would be cool, though. That would be a nice little boost to my ego. but his striking is excellent. His grappling has improved greatly since he started fighting in mixed martial arts, but man, as far as the featherweight division goes, because I believe he's fighting in the featherweight division right now, there's a laundry list of fighters out there who would just smoke him. He would not be able to stop their takedowns right now. He would get squished on the floor. And he's a tough dude, man. He is a tough dude. So, man, if you put him against... Man, who's coming to the UFC right now? If you had, like, Conor McGregor in there... Conor McGregor is not known as a grappler, but I believe Conor McGregor would out-grapple Wang Guan at this point. It would be a really interesting striking exchange, because, again, Wang Guan is a fantastic striker. I mean, he's a national Sanda champion. He did a Muay Thai fight with Yod Fairtex. He's fought some very notable fighters here in China and in Thailand, and in kickboxing, Sanda, Muay Thai, K1 fights as well. And he's done really, really well in mixed martial arts. As long as he's able to keep that fight standing, man, the dude is impressive. And you don't see a lot of flaws in his game and his stand-up game. And the guy is he's a tactical genius. He's very good at essentially programming his opponents to respond the way he wants them to respond, so that he can anticipate their movements in advance and catch their kicks and dump them on the floor and counter-strike and catch him with his right cross, which is deadly. But again, you put him up against a guy who understands the striking game and knows wrestling, jiu-jitsu, even a little bit better. Yeah, I don't think he has much of a chance in that fight. So, man, if Conor McGregor is going to out-wrestle and out-grapple you every step of the way, you need to up your grappling game. Not to say his grappling is bad, it's just there are so many fighters in the UFC whose grappling shines so much more. But yeah, man, that would be a really interesting striking game. The next part of this question, let's see here. Will the first Chinese champion be someone that hasn't fought yet? Probably. Unless, and this is a big unless, and I could see this happening. I could see the UFC really, really wanting a Chinese champion so that they could sell the UFC to the Chinese audience more easily. Like, say, look, you guys have a champion, so you should love this sport. Yao Ming, that was the basketball player's name. I finally remembered it. Yao Ming, just like Yao Ming did for basketball. Because when Yao Ming played in the NBA, a lot of Chinese people got excited about basketball. And there's probably a strong relations there, but I really don't think that China needs a Chinese champion to be excited about MMA. But I'm sure it won't hurt. Definitely won't hurt. So they could definitely set up a fight. They could set up a paper championship, and I'm certain this has happened before. And I could give some examples right now, but I won't. We'll have that discussion another day. A situation where they give a title shot to a guy who doesn't necessarily deserve it, against a guy who holds the belt, who has probably been holding on to it for a bit too long without defending it, not to mention any names. And the Chinese champion just happens to be fighting on a day where the stars align and he scores that lucky knockout punch or whatever. Or his opponent underestimated him because he came from this country where submission grappling, MMA fighting is basically brand new. And maybe he got his lucky break that day. Because again, on any given day, anybody is defeatable. Anybody. I mean, man, case in point, look at Anderson Silva versus Chris Weidman. A lot of people say, oh, those fights were flukes. 2 flukes in a row. I mean, that's kind of hard to believe, but, you know, we all wanted to see how that fight would have played out if Anderson's leg didn't break We all wanted to see how that fight would have played out if Chris Weidman hadn't landed the knockout punch. But that's how the cards fell. That is how the cards fell. Again, anybody can win or lose a fight on any given day. We train to increase our chances of that happening. So there was another part to this question. What was it? Are there fighters that could be good enough currently fighting to win that title in China? There are definitely fighters who are good enough that they might have a puncher's chance of winning a title. Like I said, Wang Guan definitely has a puncher's chance at winning a title if you gave him a title shot. Let's say you put Wang Guan against Khabib right now. I don't think they're in the same weight class, but they could make the same weight class. I mean, Wang Guan's fought as heavy as, I think, 170 and as light as 145. If you put them in a fight together, Khabib would maul him on the floor. But not before Wang Guan made a concerted effort to knock him out with his fists, which, again, he's very good at doing. So there is a chance, I would say a slim chance, but a chance that Wang Guan could win that fight by knockout. Probably not, but again, on any given day, anybody can win or lose a fight. Finally, the last part of this question. Will this mean anything to you and your gym? I think I already answered that question. Will I lose some of my better fighters to this UFC gym? You know, I have lost a few fighters to other gyms before, and not necessarily because of any difference in quality. A lot of times it's just about location, like I said before. Will I lose some fighters? Maybe. Man, you're always going to lose some fighters. I mean, my very first gym that I opened up in the States, I trained this fighter, and he was a very talented guy, and he lost his first fight. And he had a poor showing, and it was unfortunate because he was a really talented guy. And I think if his mind was in the right place, if we had trained a little differently, not even a lot differently, just a little differently, he could have dominated that fight. But afterwards, he was quite upset, and he went and he joined a different gym. And you know, that made me kind of sad. That made me feel like, oh man, I'm a failure as a coach. But it also forced me to ask some really important questions. How do I improve as a coach to the point where, if that should happen again, that my fighters will trust me enough that they won't want to leave? So, yeah, if that happens, if fighters leave, if they're like, we found something better somewhere else, well, good for them. Because I don't want to be one of those guys that holds people back. If there is a better alternative out there, I want you to know what it is. I am not the way and the truth and the life. I am not your martial arts Jesus. I have experience that can possibly help you. I know how to train people to win fights. But am I the end-all be-all of the sport of MMA? Heck no, I'm not. It's a piece of the puzzle, my friends, and I've got some of those pieces of the puzzle to share. So we'll see how this whole UFC Institute folds out in the end. Great question, thank you. Our friend Preston Hugh says, hey Ramsey, what is your favorite martial arts fighting scene from a movie or TV show and why? Oh man, that's an interesting question. Man, I used to love kung fu movies, action movies featuring martial arts of any kind. I would go out of my way. Man, back before Netflix and all this stuff, when they had a TV guide and the newspaper that would show you what would be on TV. I'd scour through that to see if there was anything martial arts related, and I would make sure I would clear my schedule to watch that thing. Like, oh yeah, I want to see this karate movie or whatever. But when I started to learn how to fight, I became largely disillusioned with fight choreography. because I realized it's not only is it not real, I mean, I know it's not real, I knew it wasn't real, but it doesn't look authentic. I mean, there's so much garbage fight choreography out there. So many garbage fight scenes where if you don't understand fighting, they'll look exciting because there's a lot of motion going on in the screen. But if you do understand fighting, you realize it's garbage. Man, that doesn't work. I mean, take, for example, the climactic battle in the original Matrix movie between Neo and Agent Smith after Neo finds out he's the one. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert for an old movie that most of you have seen. Agent Smith shoots Neo. Oh, he dies, but then he comes back to life and realizes he's the one, and everything around him is just a computer simulation, and so he can use his mind to control the computer simulation somehow. And so he is able to use superior kung fu technique to beat Agent Smith. What happens? Agent Smith runs up and starts throwing these kung fu punches at Neo. Neo turns away and almost in slow motion deflects the blows with a single arm, and then he side kicks Agent Smith and then defeats him. And if you watch this for the first time not knowing anything about martial arts, it's cool, it's kung fu, yay! The good guy wins and the bad guy loses. But if you understand a simple concept like distance, the distance between a fist and a face, and if your fist is not actually close enough to touch the other guy's face, then you don't need to block anything. And you watch that scene, and you see Agent Smith throwing punches that stop 6 inches away from Neo's face. And Neo still blocks them, doing these kung fu blocks. It's not so cool anymore. You realize, oh, this is just for show. This isn't even realistic at all. This is a facsimile of a fight. Not even a representation of a fight, just a loose facsimile. And so it loses a lot of its fun. And since I've been training in martial arts, there are very few fight scenes in movies that have impressed me. However, season 1 of Daredevil, that kind of blew me away. The hallway fight scene, the one long shot scene, impressed me for a couple of reasons. One, it's always impressive when you can do a one long shot fight choreography scene, because that's cool. That's an impressive technical accomplishment, both from the cameraman, the crew, the stuntmen, the actors. That's really cool. But the fact that they were able to use the one long take and do it well, and do it in a way that looked realistic, and have the actor behave as if he was actually fighting. You see him get out of breath. You see him wobble. You see these strikes that look like they're connecting. There's a certain element of realism. It's raw. It's not polished. It's not crisp. It's not clean. It's dirty. It's just, it reminds me of a real fight. And even though there's elements of fantasy in there, a man with superpowers, a blind man being able to beat multiple opponents who are bigger than him. I mean, that's an element of fantasy, but they did it in a way that seemed believable. So I was able to suspend my disbelief, and that was really cool. And a similar thing happens in every season. They have one long single shot take like that. They had one in a stairwell in season 2 of Daredevil, which it was a cool scene, but it didn't impress me as much as the first one, which just had this raw animalism to it. Season 3 was cool too. And somebody asked me, what did I think about the prison fight scene in season 3? If you haven't seen it, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, the main character, he ends up in this prison and they drug him. And he doesn't have his mask on, he doesn't have his costume on, so what they're able to do as far as subbing in a stunt double to do all the really cool stuff like they did in season 1 was just a practical impossibility. And so we had the actor, what's his name? I'm not doing very well with names. Charlie Cox. Doing a lot of his own stunts. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive. and it's a much more raw fight scene, and there's something about having fought, having experienced, real martial arts action in real life, having trained every single day, year after year after year, that makes you appreciate raw realism in movies, as opposed to this high fantasy kung fu. And man, I really loved that. I loved the fact that it was a much more honest representation of what this fight would look like, even with a guy who has superpowers like enhanced strength and enhanced senses and things like that. Again, it was a much more honest representation. It's kind of funny how a TV show based on a comic book ended up looking more real in its portrayal of fighting than a lot of shows that are, fight scenes that are supposedly based in reality, which end up looking more like comic books when you put them up on the screen. Anyway, great question. I'm super interested in fight choreography, even though I don't do very much of it anymore. I used to do a fair amount of it. I don't have much fight choreography up on my YouTube channel because, again, that's not really what I'm all about these days, but I do appreciate it. So if you have questions that are not directly related to MMA, but something you just want to chat about, I'm all about that. So if you have questions or comments, leave them down below in the comments section or email me at ramseydewey@gmail.com. Thanks for the question. Now get out there and train. This question comes from Jesse Reitberger, who says, "Hey Ramsey, I love your channel. Thank you. I love you too, man. I started up BJJ and I'm loving it. Cool. It's a great sport, great martial art. I am wanting to learn some striking too. Do you think I should master one martial art before I move to another, or do multiple styles at once? I'm primarily concerned with self-defense." Okay, Jesse, great question. And I get some iteration of this question almost every day on the channel, but I like the way you phrased it, so I'm going to address that. So you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you want to learn some striking too, and you want to be able to intelligently defend yourself if push comes to shove in a self-defense situation. Okay, cool. So, should you wait till you master one martial art, one fighting style? Should you wait till you master jiu-jitsu before you learn how to strike? No. Because if you wait to master jiu-jitsu before you learn how to throw a punch, you will never, ever throw a punch. And you'll never learn how to strike. Because the jiu-jitsu journey is endless, my friend. Endless. There are levels, and then there are levels, and then there are levels. And what level should you wait for? Till you earn a blue belt, till you get a purple belt, till you get a black belt, till you have 4 stripes on your black belt, till you're a world champion? Man, the longer you wait, the more wasted time that is. Now, time is the great limiting factor in learning martial arts. And if you dedicate yourself to one thing and one thing only, and invest all your time and talents and attention into that one thing, yeah, you will excel faster in that one thing. But if you want to be a mixed martial artist, if you want to be able to grapple efficiently and strike proficiently, you must invest time in both. So right now, you're doing jiu-jitsu. Cool. Invest most of your time in jiu-jitsu. Now, at the same time, do some striking. That doesn't mean necessarily go out and join a boxing club. I mean, if you can, go do it. Go join a boxing club or a Muay Thai gym or something like that. Or if your gym offers additional classes in striking, do that too. Cool. But if not, do some stuff on your own. Do some bag work. Hit the heavy bag 3 rounds a day. After class, spend some time shadow boxing. Work on your striking a little bit. Now, again, time is a limiting factor, and the average person doesn't have 2 hours to dedicate to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then 2 more hours to dedicate to Muay Thai, and then 2 more hours to dedicate to strength and conditioning, and all this stuff every single day. But what you do have is a little bit of extra time. I love the example of Andre Galvao. He's an interesting grappler because he won the ADCC openweight champion more times than anyone, to my knowledge. That might have changed since last I checked the stats, but he won it a bunch of times as the smallest competitor ever to win the openweight division in the ADCC. If you're not familiar with that, that's the world's most prestigious submission grappling tournament. I mean, that's huge. And Andre Galvao is an excellent, excellent Brazilian jiu-jitsu competitor. His jiu-jitsu is amazing. But if you watch the way he trains, what does he do? Does he do crazy, unusual training methods with jiu-jitsu? No. His jiu-jitsu technique and training and methodology and pedagogy and everything that is done in his gym is pretty standard. It's the same kind of stuff you'll find at most jiu-jitsu gyms throughout the world. But he gave an interview, Andre Galvao gave an interview, where he said after training, he does a little bit extra. He pushes himself a little bit harder, not a lot. He just spends 10 minutes by himself, forcing himself, of his own free will and initiative, without anybody making him do it, to do a little bit more. And so for 10 minutes, he does some solo drills. He does some solo movements. He does some shadow wrestling. He does simple things, not even difficult things. He just pushes himself, uses his own mental strength to push himself just a little bit farther. And as a result, that extra 10 minutes a day paid off in dividends. So if you have, say, a heavy bag hanging in the corner at your jiu-jitsu gym, a lot of them do, some of them don't, but a lot of them do. After training, spend that extra 10-15 minutes of your own initiative without anybody telling you what to do or how to do it, and hit that bag. And if you don't have that bag, shadow box. And if you're afraid of people laughing at you, shadow box outside of the gym on your own time. And then work up to being able to do it in front of people, because if you're going to fight, whether it's a combat sport or a self-defense situation, you're fighting in front of other people, even if it's just one. And training yourself to deal with social anxiety is a big part of fighting too. So the separation between striking and grappling, it really is artificial, especially in terms of self-defense. Because as soon as we start punching, as soon as we get close enough to punch, we're also close enough to grapple. And striking when you do jiu-jitsu, especially with self-defense in mind, is something you should always think about. No, I'm not saying while you roll you should pretend to punch your partner or anything like that. Although sometimes, consensually, yeah, you and your partner put on some MMA gloves and throw some light punches at each other just to see what happens and how it's different. But what I am saying is always think about the striking. In this situation, is this a smart position to be in a self-defense situation, or is this a sport-specific strategy that is only working because of the rules of Brazilian jiu-jitsu competition? Because you can have jiu-jitsu that works in both. If you look at the basic positions, like even in the IBJJF, which in my opinion is the most watered-down version of jiu-jitsu competition, even in that, what scores points? Positional advancements that work in fights, in real fights. If you take somebody down, they are on the ground, you are standing over them, you are in a dominant position. That's a good position to be in a self-defense situation. If your attacker is on the ground and you're standing over them, that's a big deal. If you pass the guard, you're fighting one person in a self-defense situation, and you pass their guard, you put yourself in a position where you can effectively strike and end that fight within seconds. That's a big deal. Move into knee mount or back mount or full mount, positions where you can quickly and effectively finish a fight. You score points for that stuff in the IBJJF. In an IBJJF tournament, you score big points for those positions. Why? Because they matter in a fight. That's kind of a big deal. So, what's happening with my contrast on the camera here? Yeah, train both, but not necessarily the way you think. You don't necessarily have to do the join a bunch of different gyms and a bunch of different styles routes. But make sure to include some striking with your grappling training. And as you get better at grappling, maybe further down the road, sign up for an actual class if you can. And if you can do both right now, cool. If you have the time right now, cool, do it. At my gym, I teach my students striking and grappling together. I have an MMA masterclass where we focus on warm-ups, techniques, drills, and then we put it all together with sparring under unified rules at the end. And then I teach classes focused on very specific parts of the game, like a boxing class for mixed martial artists, kickboxing classes for mixed martial artists, jiu-jitsu classes for mixed martial artists, wrestling classes for mixed martial artists, strength training classes for mixed martial artists, movement and flexibility for mixed martial artists. Because I want my students to have every tool that they need to intelligently defend themselves in a fight, to be able to win MMA fights. Why we need to have all of the pieces of the puzzle, and we need to put that puzzle together. We need to understand the transitions between striking and grappling, and do away with that artificial division between the two of them. But at the same time, you're on the right path. Focus on something first. Focus on one of the fundamental areas, like jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is an excellent, excellent base for a mixed martial artist. But at the same time, don't ignore the striking. Great question. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.